Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we're back with another monitor review as we're checking out a very interesting ultrawide from iiyama. Now, the GCB 3486WQ SCP may not be the catchiest name, but it does at least offer a 34-inch 3440 by 1440 VA panel that comes clocked in at 240Hz. That's alongside a claimed 4000:1 contrast ratio, a 0.4 millisecond MPRT response time, and up to 500 nits of brightness, all of that for £350. It certainly seems interesting on paper, but let's dig a bit deeper and see how it performs in the real world. iiyama then has definitely delivered a solid reputation for delivering affordable gaming monitors, and we have already checked out a few of their VA ultrawides over the years. The GCB 3486WQ SCP that we're looking at today only launched back in June, so it's pretty recent, and as mentioned we have found it retailing for £350 both on Amazon and on Scan. Let's dive in then and see what this monitor has to offer. Starting with the design then, the GCB 3486WQ SCP carries on the hallmark of iiyama monitors, meaning they're understated, almost entirely matte black, and really don't do anything flashy. Now, I have absolutely nothing against that and think it looks fine. Yes, the build is on the plasticky side, but we also can't forget this is 350 quid. Now, iiyama is using a V-shaped foot, which isn't usually my preference, but I guess it does make sense considering this is, after all, a 34-inch ultrawide panel, and that foot measures approximately 54 centimeters across. As for the included stand, this does offer some ergonomic adjustment with up to 130mm of height adjust, and then you get tilt from -3.5 to plus 18.5 degrees. Now, interestingly, despite not being listed on the official spec sheet, I actually found out by pure accident that pivot functionality is also present, while third-party VESA 100x100 mounts are supported too. It's also really good to see absolutely loads of connectivity options, starting off with the video inputs, where you get two HDMI 2.1, one DisplayPort 1.4, and a USB-C port that offers 95 watts power delivery, plus DP alt mode. There's also a Type B upstream port that feeds the two Type A and one USB-C downstream ports, while you also get the sense iiyama is targeting more than gamers with the inclusion of an Ethernet port plus built-in KVM functionality. Regular viewers will also know that I was very glad indeed to see that iiyama has fitted an OSD joystick to the monitor instead of those fiddly buttons, which are a massive pet peeve of mine. As for the OSD itself though, this has also received a much needed facelift since we last reviewed an iiyama monitor. Now, the core feature set and functionality do appear pretty similar, but is now presented in a much cleaner overall package. It's also dead easy to navigate thanks to that joystick, and my only real gripe is the lack of any color space modes, so there's no sRGB emulation mode, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on, but otherwise I haven't really got any major complaints with the OSD.
Looking to buy a gaming PC? Then you need to visit Cyberpower PC. We'll help you with the best spec at a price you'll love. With us, you get 5 years warranty, a lifetime of technical support, and systems built by experts. So it's no wonder so many gamers choose Cyberpower PC.
That leads us nicely on though to our monitor testing, where we use the Portrait Display's CalMan Ultimate software alongside an X-Rite i1 Display Pro Plus colorimeter. Starting things off then with our brightness and contrast testing, the GCB 3486WQ SCP gets very bright indeed, peaking at almost 570 nits, which is well over iiyama's claimed 500 nit figure. The minimum brightness of 69 nits isn't super low, but I guess it's passable. However, contrast does actually fall short of iiyama's claims, given we saw more like 2980:1 instead of the stated 4000:1 ratio. I did actually try the advanced contrast option in the OSD, which does improve things slightly to around 3100:1, but it also caps brightness at under 130 nits, so probably isn't worth using. Moving on though, we can see that iiyama is using a wide gamut panel, generally exceeding the sRGB space and offering 93.4% coverage for DCI-P3 alongside 92.7% reporting for Adobe RGB and 70.5% coverage for Rec 2020, so not bad at all considering the price. Default grayscale is also generally well configured from the factory. The average colour balance of 6435K is very good indeed, though the green channel is just a little stronger than the rest, but we're talking very small margins here. Gamma is also a touch low in the darker shades, but does pick up towards the end of the curve. Just to see if we could improve things as well though, I did set a manual colour balance in the OSD, leaving the red channel at 50, but knocking both green and blue channels down to 49. This is admittedly a very minor change you possibly might not even notice, but it did help make the colour balance that bit more accurate, improving the grayscale average delta E 2000 to just 1.63. Meanwhile, our saturation sweeps are typical of a wide gamut monitor, given we see a fair amount of oversaturation relative to sRGB, though things do improve when we compare against the DCI-P3 space. The same also goes for colour accuracy. Against the sRGB space, the high levels of oversaturation that we just saw means overall accuracy is pretty poor, with an average delta E 2000 of 4.46. Comparing against DCI-P3 though, this improves to 2.36. Unfortunately though, as we did mention earlier, iiyama has not included an sRGB emulation mode within the OSD, so there's no way to clamp the gamut down and reduce oversaturation. That really just leaves a full calibration as the only way to get more accurate results, and in fairness to iiyama, the results are very good indeed, with colour accuracy improving hugely, and the only slight aberration being the 100% blue channel, as that isn't quite covered by the screen's native gamut. That being said though, as I mentioned in my last review of the ASRock PG27 FFX2A, I really do think that an sRGB emulation mode should be a given in this day and age, so really hope that's something iiyama can add with the next revision. As for viewing angles as well, cheaper VA panels aren't known for being fantastic in this regard, and this one is no different, with a noticeable loss of vibrance, though I guess as it's a curved display, you're going to be sat dead center anyway, so it's not really a big deal. We can also note just a small amount of backlight bleed as well, but again, nothing out of the ordinary for an LCD. In terms of our response time testing though, where we use the open source response time tool, I'm actually skipping over the overdrive off mode along with settings 1 and 2 as they're just a bit too slow. Overdrive setting 3 is actually the first one that's worth using, and it does deliver solid results, averaging 5.25 milliseconds. That does mean there's still some slower transitions, with the results in the top row indicating dark level smearing, which is typical of a VA panel, and we can also see refresh rate compliance is hitting 60% or 70% if we give it a 1 millisecond leeway. However, there is also very little overshoot, so let's see what setting 4 can do. This mode does improve response times a good chunk now, with the average coming in at 3.46 milliseconds, while the rise times from dark shades are much improved. However, this does also come at the cost of some overshoot. The average error of 12.7 RGB values isn't terrible, but it does result in some visible overshoot, as we'll see shortly. Lastly, we also check out the overdrive setting 5, and this can just basically be ignored, as the overshoot is pretty terrible. I personally then think setting 3 is the most well balanced, but the bad news is iiyama hasn't configured it to behave differently at lower refresh rates. It's fine down at 120Hz, but at 60Hz, the overshoot is again pretty significant, so it's not an ideal solution if you're an adaptive sync gamer. In terms of how those results stack up against the competition then, if we ignore all the OLED monitors and just focus on the LCDs, it's pretty middle of the road as it goes. We have seen faster, but we also have to remember the price is just 350 quid. Here though, we can see a visual representation of those 3 overdrive modes I just talked about. Setting 4 does actually clean up a good amount of the dark smearing we can see from setting 3, but you can also see the overshoot that's introduced, particularly on the bottom image. Some people may be fine with that. I personally find it a little distracting, but let me know what you think down in the comments. And of course, you can also see why setting 5 is definitely one to avoid. For some comparisons then, I've roped in the AOC U27G4R that I recently reviewed, and despite the iiyama monitor offering a higher refresh rate, motion clarity is actually fairly similar between the two, though you can clearly see the difference the dark level smearing makes versus an IPS panel, which does not have that issue. Just for fun as well, I also include the MSI 272URX, which is a 240Hz OLED monitor, and you can clearly see that is setting the standard for motion clarity and response times, though it also costs over twice as much as the iiyama monitor. iiyama does have one final setting though to try and improve things, and that is being motion blur reduction, aka backlight strobing. There's 7 different settings to try in total, but there's a few clear downsides, so ultimately I don't think MBR is worth using. For one, it forces the overdrive setting 5, resulting in a lot of overshoot, which I do not understand at all, while there's also some visible signal crosstalk, resulting in that double image effect. On top of that, the MBR 7 setting, which does offer the best clarity, also caps brightness at below 140 nits, and it cannot be used with adaptive sync, so I really do think that will rule it out for a lot of people. The good news is there's very little in the way of latency though, with the screen averaging 2.32 milliseconds, so that works out at just a little over half a frame at 240Hz, so absolutely nothing to worry about. In terms of what all of that means then for the real world gaming experience, I have to say I got on with it pretty well. I do think that combination of response times and motion clarity does lend the screen towards more slower paced AAA titles rather than competitive games despite the 240Hz refresh rate. That's obviously not to say you can't play those games, but I did find myself noticing the dark level smearing more in titles like Call of Duty, given everything on screen just moves that much faster. Switching back to something a little slower though, and it looks absolutely fantastic thanks to the wide and punchy gamut giving a saturated image, plus the contrast you get from a VA is better than anything an IPS panel can achieve. I also really found myself enjoying the 1500R curvature too. The last few ultrawides I've tested had only been 1800R, which is a lot more subtle, whereas this has a bit more of a wraparound feel to it without being overly aggressive like something like an 800R screen, which you can find on the market. That's obviously a personal preference thing, but as mentioned, I did really enjoy it, and obviously you get the extra on-screen space as well compared to a 16:9 display. It's also fair to point out though that one other consideration has to be the rest of your PC, as while ultrawide 1440p isn't that many more pixels than standard 1440p, if you do want to drive it as close to the refresh rate as possible, you will certainly want a decent rig, in particular a strong GPU, though it obviously does depend on what games you're playing, but that's just something to bear in mind. For the times you can't quite nail 240 FPS in every game though, adaptive sync is supported, and as you might expect there's no official G-Sync certification, but it still worked fine with my RTX 4090 with no flickering or anything weird like that. That does bring us on to the end of the video then, and having been a bit disappointed the last time we checked out an ultrawide monitor from iiyama, it's safe to say the GCB 3486WQ SCP has gone a long way to rectifying that experience. It's certainly not without its own flaws, but at £350 there is a lot to like here. That starts with the factory calibration, which is solid. Colour balance comes in at very close to the 6500K target, and while gamma is a little low, I think we're being quite picky. It also gets very bright indeed at almost 570 nits, though contrast was closer to 3000 to 1 than the claimed 4000 to 1 ratio. I do think it's a shame though that iiyama hasn't included an sRGB emulation mode, which I personally think is a very valuable feature in 2025. That said, iiyama has revamped its OSD menu system recently, making it much cleaner and more modern looking, while there's also a number of features including built-in Ethernet, 95W USB-C power delivery, and KVM functionality, which makes me think the company is targeting more than just gamers with this screen. Speaking of gaming though, the core experience is solid, though I do think iiyama could improve a few things for the next revision. Fundamentally though, motion clarity is solid at 240Hz, though given it is a cheaper VA panel, there is some dark level smearing visible at times. iiyama also offers a motion blur reduction mode, but as mentioned it has a number of significant drawbacks, so that's definitely something to work on for the next one. I do like the 1500R curvature however, and you combine that with the solid response times, punchy image from the wide gamut alongside that VA contrast, and you can see why I think this screen will appeal, particularly if you value immersion above all else. So no, iiyama's GCB 3486WQ SCP isn't perfect, but at the £350 asking price, I do think many of its flaws can be forgiven. Yes, it would be great to see the response times and NBR modes refined for a future revision to give even better motion clarity, but even then, if you're in the market for a curved ultrawide, I still think this is worth buying. Anyway guys, that is going to do it for this review. If you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to ding that notification bell so you don't miss when we upload a new video. If you want to carry on the conversation as well, you can find a link to our Discord server down in the description, and while you're there you can also find links to both our merch store and our Patreon if you want to help us out that way. That's it for this one though guys, I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.